Hello again, everyone. This is Zombie Kids Rule, and so I'm back with the explanation for the demo that I just posted earlier this morning. So this is going to be the actual explanation for that D&D style methods of rolling attributes, right? So there were 12 methods that I highlighted in the demo, and I gave some explanation of the background of it there, and so I encourage you to watch that. And it is a rather long demo just because it shows all the different methods. And there's also a link in the description of that demo video to a thread on rpgmakerweb.com, the forums over there, that also in that thread will give the results of my experiments, I should say. So after I built all these, I ran a bunch of experiments, the same number of tests for each method, to kind of figure out the averages that you would expect, that you should get. So the highs, the lows, and then the kind of the median or the in between average of the different methods. Because I was doing this because some people just look at it and say, oh yeah, math, this just, I know how this is going to work out. I don't. So I built these to see how they would work in MZ, to make sure I could do it, and then to build a test to see what the average results were that might inform me with how I want to implement something like this, because I like D&D style mechanics. So again, I'll throw my caveat out there. I don't claim to be an expert. I don't say that this is the best way to do anything, the most efficient way to do anything. I just make these tutorials based on things that I've experimented with, that I've been able to successfully do. I test it to make sure it works. And I may improve upon it later, but this is just one way of doing something. And in fact, as I highlighted in the demo, I'm going to actually show the way I built this, and then I realized a much more efficient way to do part of it. So I'm going to make sure I highlight that and say, hey, look, in this particular area or these particular areas of this event, you can make this simpler, and I'll show you how to do it. I didn't update this yet because it would take additional work that I don't want to invest at this time, and it would take more testing. Again, because when I make changes, I want to thoroughly test them to make sure there's no unexpected results, and I don't want to invest the time in that right now. So anyway, I will highlight that. What I'm going to do is very quickly play test just this last event to remind you how it works. Hopefully you watched the demo. If you didn't, I encourage you to do that, but I'll just show this because this is the event that I'm going to actually break down. So this is the 12th method. You can see all the methods over here. And so basically the lady is saying, hey, this is the method I'm gonna show. And then let's see how it works. So basically it's doing a die 20 roll, and then if it's over 18, it's going to reduce it down to 18 and add those extra reduction values into a point pool. So basically, let's see, do we have any? I know in the demo I had it. Oh, no, there's one. I showed it happen in the demo. So again, this is just a refresher of what's going on. You can always watch that demo of this. I would encourage it. So this just again highlights the results of method 1 and 2, method 3 and 4, method 5 and 6, method 7 and 8, method 9 and 10, and then method 11 and 12. And then it shows the total, so meaning adding up all those attributes that remain to see what the total is. So if you were interested in doing like a point buy system, what is kind of the average that you get from these different results. And so it does that. And then it gives you the option of doing it again, which I'll say no. It shows the comparison of all 12. So behind the scenes, it was running all 11 of the other ones. It just didn't show you. And then you have that choice of saying, hey, do you want to see a bunch of tests run at the same, run together? And say, sure. And I'm not doing 10 because that rolls through each single one and it shows you. But if I roll 100, it basically just gives you the end result. So this was the cumulative of those 100. Here's the number of sets. Here's the method average. So if I do it again, that was 95. This was 97, right? If I do 1,000, it did it essentially 1,000 times. And it said, okay, this is the average of the results of rolling 1,000 sets of attributes. And just one more time, and there you go. And that's what the event is doing. So as just as a reminder, so each one of these, so I'll exit here. So each one of these is highlights a specific method, and then they build on each other, right? So ultimately, when you get to here, it's going to show all 11 of the first methods, and then it's going to show the 12th method and how to go through it. So how did I build this? All right. So again, this is D&D style random rolling for attributes. And I didn't build the assigning the attributes. I didn't build the, whether the attributes automatically go, or I should say, whether the roles automatically go to attributes as you do it, or whether you roll all of the attribute and then let the player assign them to whichever attribute you want. I didn't build that for this particular experiment. So how does this work? So we're going to open this up. And again, just remember this is for experimentation purposes. And of course, when I do this, I make the event show what it's doing in different parts, just so that I can confirm what's happening. So here's my sprite. Priority is same as characters, so they basically bump into each other. And then the trigger is an action button, so I have to actually click on the character to activate the event. So first thing it does is using just a show text to tell you what the actual method is. Then show text to say, hey, let's see how this works out. All right, so the first one is the first method. And what you're going to see is that I reuse a lot of variables in here, and we're using arrays for all of these methods. So first, we have a label again. Why? Because when we get to the very end of the event and says, hey, do you want to do this again? And if we say yes, we're going to jump back to this label, so it'll go through the whole event again. So we place our label again here. Now, this is a variable that I'm going to reuse a bunch. Stat loop amount. So variable 580, stat loop amount, you name it, whatever makes sense to you. I'm setting that to 0. Now, normally when you start a game, all variables are set to 0. But again, if this is important, because if you come back to this event, like I would just, click on the event, see the results, leave, and then come back, that loop amount is not going to be 0 anymore unless you set it to 0. So first things first, I'm setting it to 0. Then this is the first method. So I have 12 arrays. This is the first one. So variable 541 is stat method array 1. And it's set to, essentially, it's initializing this as a empty array. So when you want to make an array, I've highlighted this before, you take a variable, set it to basically just empty brackets. So bracket and bracket, opening and closing brackets, that's an array. That's how you initialize an array. You put it in the script field. You could type things here, right, initially to set the values of your array. But in this instance, we're going to basically add values to that array as they happen. So we have our array for the first method. Then we have a loop here. And basically, because we have 8 attributes, so this first time we're going to do 3 die 6 8 times to make sure we get enough attributes. So we're using a loop function, right? So if I'm here and I double click, basically on page 1, I have the loop command. And when you select loop, it creates loop and repeat above, and you tell it what to do within that loop. Okay? So here's my loop and my repeat above. So what's it doing? First, it's going to roll. So I have 3 variables for die 6-1, die 6-2, and die 6-3. So 3 variables to get a random number roll between 1 and 6. So variable, set, random, 1 to 6. Do that 3 times. So I'm going to get 3 values. Then what this is doing is this is just adding up those 3 results. So variable 576, stat for array, I'm going to reuse that variable a bunch of times. I'm going to reuse these variables a bunch of times too. And that's perfectly fine. So the stat for the array variable is essentially adding the 3 roll results. So variable 556, 557, and 558. 556, 557, 558. And what we're doing is we're doing that in a script, right? So pick my variable, stat for array, set it to the script, and then I put the script in here. This is how you can add, you can do more math things than instead of just doing one at a time, right? I could have done this one at a time. I could have basically said stat for array, add the variable, the first one, and then stat for the array, add the next variable. And I could have done that 3 different times. But this is a way to just make it simpler. So again, I've highlighted this before, but basically the variable, this is in the script, $game variables dot value, and then the value of the variable, 556. And remember to watch your capitalization. Plus, again, the variable 557. So you repeat that formula there. Plus, again, $game variables dot value, and then 558. So it's just adding those 3 variables together. Then what this is doing is it's using a script to add push. So push is adding the value of 556, the stat for the array, and it's adding it to the array 541. So here it is. Here's the array. So variable 541 is an array. So it's pushing the value of 576 to the array 541. It's adding it to the array. Then we're going to reuse this variable a bunch of times too. So variable 580 stat loop amount. We're adding 1 to it. Why? Because we need to track how many times we've looped through this, right? We don't want to loop forever, so we need to figure out how many times we've looped. So then we immediately do a conditional branch check. If the stat loop amount, right here, is equal to 8, that means we have added 8 values to our array, then we're going to break the loop, and we're going to go down to the next part. Otherwise, so if it's not equal to 8, so it's 7 or below, it's going to repeat above, which means it jumps back to the loop, right? So repeat above jumps back to the loop. And you notice you don't have to do else's here. You could use an else if you wanted to, but you don't have to, because if this is not true, it'll just drop down and it'll repeat above. So that is the first method. Okay, so from here, so I should say from here down to here is the first method of rolling. And in this event, it's not showing you what it's doing because it's only going to show you the 12th method. So that's method number 1. Method number 2 starts here. We reset the stat loop amount to 0 because we're going to use it again. We initialize the second array. So variable 542, stat method array 2 is an empty array. Then we're going to have our loop. And our loop is going to basically, just like it did before. So this time it's 4 die 6. So we have 4 variables for die 6 rolls, random 1 to 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. Okay, now this is where I'm going to explain this, and then I'm going to explain how you can make this part simpler and easier. So the first way I built this was using a bunch of nested conditional branch checks. This is perfectly, this works. There's nothing wrong with this. It just gets long and it can get a little bit convoluted. So we can simplify this, but the way I built it was conditional branch. So this whole thing is the first conditional branch. And then there's a conditional branch under that. And then there's a conditional branch under that, right? And what it's doing is it's saying if die6(1) is less than or equal to die6(2), and if die6(1) is less than or equal to die6(3), and if die6(1) is less than or equal to die6(4). Basically, and you could use a script for this too. That's another way to simplify it. I'm going to show you a different way to simplify it because I struggle a little bit with using scripts and then conditional branches. I struggle a little bit using conditional branches within scripts themselves. So all this is saying is basically if the die6(1) roll is the lowest roll, right? Because that's what these three are. If the die6(1) is lower than die2, and if it's lower than die3, and if it's lower than die4, then that means it's the lowest result. Then what it's going to do is it's going to use that variable stat for array, variable 576, and it's going to add the die2, die3, and die4 roll. So 559, 558, 557. 559, 558, 557. It's doing the math like it did previously. And then once you do that math, you add the die2, die3, die4 roll, you're going to push that value, 576, to the array 542. That's the one we initialized here, the method 2. We're going to push that to the array. Then here we're jump to label dropped. Okay, and I'll explain why we're doing that. We're gonna skip over if this is true, if die6(1) is the lowest value, or I should say it might be one of the lowest values, and that's why we're dropping. Then it's gonna do this. It's gonna add up the other three values. It's gonna push that total value to the array, right? And then it's gonna drop so that it skips these other conditional branch checks. Here's label dropped. I'll explain exactly why that's necessary in just a second. Now, this is essentially a copy and paste of this, right? So this is a copy and paste of this, and I'm just changing the values. So I have to change these to if die6(2) is lower than die6(1), and if die6(2) is lower than die6(3), and if die6(2) is lower than die6(4). So basically saying if my die6(2) roll is the lowest, right, of these three, then use that variable stat for array and add the variable 556, 558, and 559. So dice roll 1, dice roll 3, dice roll 4, right? So it's that math. It's the same script. You're just changing the values within it. Once you get the total, you push that value 576 right here to the array 542. And then if this was true, you jump to label dropped. But if the die6(1) wasn't the lowest and the die6(2) wasn't the lowest, then we'll check and see, well, is the die3 the lowest? So again, this is just a copy and paste of the first version. And then you change the value. If die6(3) is less than or equal to die6(1), if die6(3) is less than or equal to die6(2), if die6(3) is less than or equal to die6(4). So this is attention to detail stuff. Then you do your math. So again, we're not going to add the die6(3) roll. So this is adding variable 556 is the die6(1), 557 is die6(2), and then we skip over 558 because that's die6(3), and we're adding 559, which is die6(4). Right? So again, all of this is copy and pasting, and then just changing the values as appropriate. Then we take the total 556, push it to the array variable 542, right? We push it. So I don't think I explained this last time, but you can see it. It's in the script. I should have explained this before, but using a script, $game variables dot value 542, so that's the variable 542, and that's an array, dot push, that means you're adding something to that array, and you're within parentheses $game variables dot value 576. So that's the variable 576. You're adding that, you're pushing that to this variable, right? So pay attention to your parentheses, right? And how do you get there? Basically, event commands, page 3, script, right? So anyway, I should have highlighted that last time up above, but anyway, I just highlighted it. So that's the push function, and I've used this in other tutorials before. And then if this is true, you jump to label dropped. But if the die 6 1 isn't the lowest, if the die 6 2 isn't the lowest, if the die 6 3 is the lowest, well then die 6 4 should be the lowest, but it's a series of conditional checks. Again, copy and paste. So if the die 6 4 is less than or equal to die 6 1, it's less than or equal to die 6 2, it's less than or equal to die 6 3. So we're just changing these values, right? Whichever one's necessary. We update our math. So we're not adding the die 6 4, right? So we're just adding variable 556, 557, and 558, right? And if you forget, what are they? Well, they're right here, 556, 557, 558, 559. And then you do your push, right? Your script for pushing it to the variable. So push the value to the array, and then jump to label dropped. And then here's label dropped. Then, so before I explain why we have that dropped label, the next thing it does is it uses that variable stat loop amount, adds 1 to it, right? Because remember, we reset it to 0. We've gone through this once, so we add 1 to it. It immediately does its conditional branch check. If stat loop amount is equal to 8, then break the loop. Otherwise, if you haven't gone through this 8 times, repeat above, which is go back to the loop and rerun it, right? You're going to loop through it 8 times. Now, why do we need the jump to label dropped? Why do we need to do that? Because imagine if die 6 1 is a 1, and die 6 2 is a 1, and then die 6 3 is a 4, and die 6 4 is a 5, right? Or just make it easier. Die 6 3 is a 3, die 6 4 is a 4. So it's 1 1 3 4. Well, when it goes and checks here, die 6 1 is going to be less than or equal to die 6 2 because they're both 1s. So that is going to be true. Die 6 1 is going to be less than or equal to die 6 3. That's definitely true because this is a 3. And die 6 1, which was a 1, is less than or equal to die 6 4. So it's going to do this. It's going to push a value to the array. If we don't have this, it's going to then check this down here. And based on our example, die 6 2 is also less than or equal to die 6 1 because they're both 1s. And it is less than the third roll, and it is less than the 4 roll. So it's going to do this again, which we don't want. We don't want it to do that. So because these numbers could be duplicated, right, in theory, all 4 of these could be 1 in theory. In which case, if we didn't have the jump to label dropped, it would do this, and then it would do this, and then it would do this, and then it would do this, and we would end up with 4 values in our array. And we don't want that. We only want 1 value for each set that we roll. So that's why the jump to label dropped is critical here, because the values of these random rolls could be the same. And so we don't want it to repeat. So that's why we have that. And then I already showed you about the checking the loop, and then if it's been 8 times, we break it. If not, we repeat above. Now, before I go on to stat method 3, I want to explain how this can be made simpler. So this and this and this and this can all be reduced to a much simpler method, a much simpler way of doing this. How do you do it? Okay, so this is how I would do it. Now, again, there could be scripts for combining these, but what I would do is this. I would take these four roles, okay? I would take these four variables and I would add them by pushing them to a temporary array. Okay, so I would create a new array. I would create a new array, and it would be a temporary array, and I would basically push these four results into that array. Then what I would do, and actually all of this that I'm explaining, you're going to see later in this event. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do each step, but I'm just going to tell you what I would do here. So I would take these four variables. I would use this script to push those values into a temporary array. Then later in this event, I'm going to show you how you can sort the array. And when you sort the array, it basically, well, the way I'm doing it, because you can do it different ways, but the way I do it is I'm sorting it from lowest to highest value. So if this is a, let's go backwards. If this is a 6, 5, 4, 3, then the values of your array, because they're being pushed, one at a time, it would be 6, 5, 4, 3. When you sort the array, it will be 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to go from low to high. However the results end up. You can essentially remove the lowest value from the array. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So I would remove the lowest value from that array. And then the other thing I'm going to show later on is how to add up all the values in an array using the reduce function. So you can reduce, instead of pushing, you're reducing an array. It's the dot reduce. And all that means is it adds up all the values of the array and gets a total. And once you have that total, that's what you want to push to your actual method array. So once again, I'll just explain this. I'll probably explain it a bunch of times. And then later in the event, we'll see exactly how to do it. So I would take these four variables. I would use this type of thing to push them into a temporary array. So let's say I make an array, let's say just array 1 for the sake of this, this example. So array 1, I make an array 1, just like this, right? I variable 1 and make an empty array. I push these values to it by using the dot push, and this would be 556, and then 557, and then 558, and then 559, and I'd be pushing it to the array 1. Once they're all in there, I will use the script for sorting that array. So I'm going to make that the values of that array go from low to high. Then I'm going to splice the lowest value from that array. So I'm going to splice it. I'm going to cut it out. So now it's no longer there. Then I'm going to reduce the array, whatever remains in the array, right? So it went from 4 values to 3 because I spliced one out. I'm going to reduce, meaning add the remaining values. And then that, when you reduce something, you're using a variable, right? So it's whatever you reduce, whatever it adds up, it's temporarily storing it in a variable. That's the variable that I would push to my actual method array, okay? And then I can reuse all of those again. And I can, so it's very simple. So I take this and this and this and this, and it all basically gets combined. Because now I don't have to do all these conditional branch checks. I add the 4 values to an array using the push, right? I create a temporary array, push all these values to it. Then we're going to see later on how to splice a value out of that array, just get rid of it. Then how to reduce the values of that array, meaning add them up, and then take that total value, and I would push that to my actual method array. And that would be my first result. It's much, much simpler. Okay. So again, I didn't do it that way. You can do it this way. It's just the longer manual way of doing it. Okay. I hope that makes sense. I'll explain it again later, and I'll highlight it when we actually get to the splice function and the reduce function. Okay. And the sort function. You'll see it coming up. All right. So that takes care of method 2. So then we get down to, well, we got to do method 3. So we reset the variable stat loop amount to 0. We initialize our method 3 array. So variable 543 stat method array 3 is an empty array. Then we're going to roll the 4 dice, right? That's what this is simulating, right? So these 4 variables, like we used above, and we're randomly 1 to 6. So it's like rolling 4 6-sided dice. And then this is essentially the same as it was above in the previous method, right? So it's first checking through these series of conditional branches, these nested conditional branches. Is the die 6-1 roll the lowest? If so, then this is repeated from above too. You add up the appropriate values, the second dice roll, the third dice roll, the fourth dice roll, right? 57, 557, 558, 59. And then you add that up into another variable, and then you push that variable, that total, to your method 3 array, right? You're pushing it into that array. And then you're jumping to label dropped 2. So I had to change the labels because if I left this dropped, it would actually go back to here. And I don't want that. I want it to go down. So I labeled it, I changed it to label dropped 2. And then this is a copy and paste just like it was before, where you're changing it to die, the die 2. You're changing whichever one is appropriate. You're changing this over here because you want to add up the appropriate 3 results. This stays the same. This stays the same, right? And so this is a copy and paste. This is a copy and paste. And again, these could be simplified by simply pushing these values to a temporary array using this type of script, and then sorting that array, splicing out the one value, reducing the remaining values, adding them up, and then pushing that reduced variable, the one that's the total, to my actual method array. That's the simpler way of doing this, okay? And then, of course, just like the method above, here's our label dropped 2. Here's where we're adding 1 to that stat loop amount variable. Now this time it's checking to see, have we done it 10 times? Because this is the third method. If we're going to do the 4 dice 6 10 total times, right? And then if we've hit 10, we break the loop. Otherwise, we repeat above. And then that method's done. So then we go on to method 4, which is, again, a lot of these are very similar. So we reset our stat loop amount tracker to 0. We initialize our 4th array. So stat method array 4, we make it an empty array, right? Then we have a label here, re-roll. Why? Well, because in this example, we're going to re-roll if there's a value under 8. So we have to have a label re-roll to go back to. So now we have our loop, right? Here's a pretty big loop. So we have our loop. And it's doing very similar to what it did in the previous method. We'd have our 4 variables to simulate our random die 6 rolls. We've seen this. This is very similar to the above ones, but we had to add something to it. So what did we add? Well, if the die 6-1, right, die 6-1, die 6-1, if it's lower than these 3, then we're going to do that math, which we did above, okay? But now we got to check. because we want to do that re-roll if it's less than 8. So as soon as we do this, we do the math, we're going to do a conditional branch check. If stat for array, right, stat for array 576, if that's less than 8, then jump to label re-roll. So jump up here and do it again. Otherwise, so if it's not less than 8, it's going to drop down here. It's going to push that value, stat for array, it's going to push that variable to my method for array. And then it jumps to label dropped 3. Because again, I don't want, if I use dropped or drop 2, it's going to go backwards in the event. I don't want that. So it's got to drop down. And remember, I explained why it needs to drop down, right? Because some of these results could be the same number, and that would be problematic. So basically this, you copy and paste down here and then change the necessary values, right? If die 2, if die 6 2 is the lowest of these ones, then you change your math, right? You change the ones you're adding. You do the same check. If stat for array is less than 8, jump to label re-roll. Try it again. If not, then push it. Push the value to your method for array, and then jump to label drop 3. This is just a copy and paste, changing the values, right? Change the appropriate values here, change the appropriate values over here, make sure you're adding up the right variables. This is the same, this is the same, this is the same, right? And then this is, again, copy and paste. Just change the correct values. Once again, this whole section from here all the way down through here, that can be simplified by doing what I explained before. Take your temporary array, push these values to the temporary array, right? Yeah, no, you could still do that. So you take these values, push them to the empty array, then you sort it, then you splice the lowest value out, then you reduce it so that you get the total of the remaining 3 values, and then that's what you're checking here. If the total of that is less than 8, you would just re-roll. So you don't have to have all these different conditional branch checks. You can do it much, much, much simpler. Okay? So again, a lot of this can be simplified by doing that push to a temporary array, sort it, splice it, reduce it, and then do your checks. And then we have our label dropped 3. So this is where we're dropping to. We add 1 to our stat loop amount. Then we immediately check, have we done it 8 times? If not, then repeat above. If yes, break the loop. So we drop down here. And that's the end of the 4th method. So then we go into the 5th method, which is 4 die 6. And then if you have one under 8, you change it to an 8. So it's going to be very similar to this up here, but we're just going to change this conditional branch check. So we reset our stat loop amount to 0. We initialize our method 5 array, right? So our variable. Then we have our 4 simulated die 6 rolls with our variables. Then we have this same thing. It's very similar to the previous method, right? So you can actually copy and paste from other previous methods. You just have to pay attention to detail and make sure you make any slight tweaks that you need. This is almost identical to the previous method, method 4. So we do our checks. Is it the lowest? We do our math. And then we saw this above. But if, conditional branch, stat for array is less than 8, instead of jumping to re-roll, instead of doing that, we're just going to make the variable stat for array an 8. So if we rolled these and the result was a 7, then it's going to actually change the value of this from 7 to 8. And that is what gets pushed to the method 5 array. Okay? So again, lots of copying and pasting here. You just have to make sure that you update the values appropriately as you go through. So it's a lot of attention to detail, but a lot of copying and pasting, saving time. Then we jump to label dropped 4, because again, we want to drop down, not go back to a previous label. So just like the methods before, this is a copy and paste from the previous section. You just have to update, right? We're checking to see if die 6.2 is the lowest. And then we make sure we're adding the right variables. And then we do our conditional branch check, just like we did up here. If the stat for array, based on the math, is less than 8, then actually change it to an 8. And then that's what gets pushed. And if it's not less than 8, then it's just going to push the amount, right, to the array for this method. Jump to label drop 4. This one, same thing, copy and paste, just change your values. This one, copy and paste, just change your values. Once again, all of this can be simplified by pushing these to a temporary array, sorting it, splicing it, reducing it, and then checking to see this part, right? Is it less than 8? If so, then change this and push that to my method 5. If not, then just push the result to my method 5. Okay? All right, and then just like last time, the previous times, here's our label, dropped 4. Here's where we're adding 1 to the stat loop amount. Here's where we're checking to see, have I looped through enough times? If I've looped through 8 times, then break the loop, drop down. Otherwise, repeat above. Go back up and go through the loop again. Okay? Then we're on to the 6th method. Very, very similar. So we reset our stat loop amount to 0. We initialize our array for our method 6, right? So stat method array 6, empty array. Now we have our loop, right? That whole big loop. But this time, because we, in this one, we're going to basically, this one is we are re-rolling, this is the 6th array. So we're re-rolling once, right? We're re-rolling once. So this one, we have to do, we have to add a piece to it. So we have our first roll. So we have a label, first roll. Then we have our first variable, die6.1 is equal to random 1 to 6. So this is our first die roll. Then we have a conditional branch. If that roll, right, if variable 556, die6.1 is equal to 1, then we're going to jump back to the first roll and roll it again. So that's how we're doing our, hey, I rolled a 1, I don't want to keep a 1, I'm going to re-roll it. So this, right, that's the first one. The next part is essentially a copy and paste, but you just have to change some of the values. So I changed the label from first roll to second roll. I changed the variable from 556 to 557. And then I changed the conditional branch from die6.1 to die6.2. And then I changed my jump to label second roll. Now, if the copying and pasting this here and then updating it isn't more efficient for you than just redoing it, that's fine. If I recall correctly, I made this, I copied and pasted it 4 times, or I copied it and then I pasted it 3 times, and then I just changed the appropriate values, right? So when I got down here, I changed the label to third roll, changed this variable to 558, changed this conditional branch to die6.3, changed this label to third roll. Okay, and then I did the exact same thing with this portion here, right? Just made the necessary changes. Now that is allowing us to roll our 4 6-sided dice, and if any of them is a 1, it re-rolls that single dice. And we're saving it into 4 different variables, so we still know what each dice roll is. So after that, we go into those conditional branches, which we did in the other methods. And these are, again, these can be simplified doing the way I showed, the way I highlighted before. But you do it the longer way, check to see the nested conditional branches. Is die 6-1 my lowest? If yes, then do my appropriate math. Make sure I change the right variables. Then I push it, right? I push the result um, to my method sixth array. And then I jump to label dropped 5. So I will drop down. This is a copy and paste from above. And I just change. I change my die 6-1 to die 6-2. Change whichever one of these is necessary. Change my variable over here to make sure I'm adding the correct 3 variables, right? Then push that. Then drop to label 5, right? So very similar to the previous methods. This is a copy and paste. This is a copy and paste. And just change the appropriate values. Again, this can all be simplified by doing take my 4 die 6 rows, push them to a temporary array, sort it, splice it, reduce it, and then that reduced value is the one that gets pushed to my method array. So that could be all simplified. Here's my label dropped 5. Here's where I'm adding 1 to my stat loop amount. Here's my conditional check to see have I done it 8 times. If yes, break the loop, drop down. If no, repeat above. Okay, that wraps up the 6th method. The 7th method, I have a label, reroll set. Why? Because over here it says if none of the values in my attributes are more than 16, right? If I don't get a 17 or higher, then we're going to re-roll the entire set. So that's where I have my label, re-roll set. I also have to have a new thing here. It's a switch. I have a control switch, 48. Result over 16 is off. Now again, when you start your game, all switches should be set to off. All variables should be basically 0 if you haven't otherwise declared them or whatever. But if you come back to this event, we have to make sure that this switch, if it got turned on, it is turned off. So here we are, we're turning this switch off just to doubly check to make sure. And again, this is what it looks like. Control switches, here's my switch. Operation is off. And when this is on event commands, page 1, control switches, right? Pick your switch and set your operator on or off. So we're going to make sure this switch is off. We have our stat loop amount set to 0. We are initializing our method 7 array, right? Empty array. Then we have our loop, like we did before. And then we have our 4 die 6, right? Our variables simulating die 6 rolls. Then this should look very similar by this time, right? This should look familiar. This is what, and again, you can copy and paste from previous methods to save yourself some time. Making sure that this is the die 6 1 lower than the other 3, lower than or equal to, right? And then we do our math. Make sure you're adding the correct variables. Use that script for pushing the value to the method 7 array. And then we have to have a different conditional branch. So remember before we had a conditional branch to check is it less than 8, right? Or what have you? Or is it a 1, right? Well, this is if stat for if the stat for array variable is greater than 16, then we are turning the control switch result over 16 on. That's telling us that we did get a 17 or higher. So we're turning that switch on if that's true. And then we're jumping to label dropped 6 because again, we want to bypass all these other ones if we did this, right? Because remember, these values could have the same, so there could be 2 1s, and we don't want 2 of these things running. This is a copy and paste from the previous one. Just make sure you update your values appropriately, okay? And then down here, same thing. This is the same as it was above. If the variable that we're going to push to the array is greater than 16, make sure that switch is turned on. Because we don't know. We're going to loop through this a bunch of times. We don't know if the switch is on or off. Don't really care because you can just say turn it on again, and if it's on, if it's already on, it's not going to do anything. It's still going to be on. Or and then jump to label drop 6. This is just a copy and paste, which you just have to update the values appropriately. Again, checking to make sure that we would turn on that switch. This is a copy and paste, so all four of those are very similar. You can save yourself some time and just update the appropriate values, right? Make sure you're updating the appropriate variables to add. Once again, I'm just going to say it. All of this can be simplified using that push these four values to the temporary array and then sort it, splice it, reduce it, and then do your appropriate check from there. So all of these conditional branches could be simplified into a much easier method of doing it. Here's my label drop 6. Here's where I'm adding to my stat loop amount. Here's where we're checking, hey, have I done it 8 times? If yes, break the loop, drop down. If no, repeat above. Okay, so now what does it do? So this is where it's checking. So we loop through it 8 times, and it says, okay, I've done this 8 times now. Break the loop, drop down. We have our conditional branch check. If this switch is off, if result over 16 is off, that means we didn't get a result of 17 or higher because the switch is off. Well, that tells me I need to jump to label reroll set. I got to go back and start all over again with this method because I didn't get a result over 16. If the switch is on, right, it will just proceed down here because there's no else. You don't have to have an else branch because this will only work if the switch is off. So if the switch never got turned on, if the switch never got turned on, you're going to end up re-rolling the set. If the switch did get turned on, then this won't be true, and it will just basically go down here to the next part. Okay? Now, we're up to method 8. Okay, I know this is a very long thing, but these are all the different methods. So we change our stat loop amount back to 0. We initialize our method 8 array, right, an empty array. Now this one is only 2 die 6, and then we're adding 6 to it. So we're going to make a tiny bit of a change. We're only using 2 variables to simulate our 1 die 6 roll. And then when we do our math, we're only adding that variable 556, 557, 556, 557, and then we're just adding a 6. So you can do this in the script, right? And yes, I had to experiment with this to make sure I actually did it right. But here's how you add the first variable. Here's how you add the second variable. And then you just do plus 6 at the end, and it does your math for you. Okay? So there's your math. Then this is the same as it was in all the previous methods. You push the value of that 576 value, stat for array. You push that to your appropriate array, right? Your method 8 array. Then we're adding 1 to our stat loop. We're checking to see, have I done it 8 times? If yes, break the loop. If no, repeat above. So this is a very short loop, right? Very quick, very simple. This is very, very easy to do. And then once we've done it 8 times, it just proceeds to the next method, method 9. Nothing fancy there. So method 9 is 3 die 6, and we're going to convert the lowest to a 6. So these are all concepts we've already seen in the previous methods. So we reset the stat loop amount to 0. We initialize our empty array for method 9. Then we have our loop. Then we take our 3 variables for simulating the random 1 to 6 rolls. Now we have these conditional branches, right? The nested conditional branches, but you only need 2 instead of 3 because you only have 2 rolls to check. I'm sorry, you have 3 roles to check. So in this one, is die 6-1 less than or equal to die 6-2? And is die 6-1 less than or equal to die 6-3? If that's true, then we're basically going to, because it's true, it's the lowest, we're going to change it to a 6, right? That's all we're doing. So if die 6-1 is the lowest, we're going to change it to a 6. Then we're going to do our math, and we're just going to add up the 3 variables, 556, 557, 558. Then we're going to push that to the array, right? The appropriate array. So remember, you can copy and paste this from previous ones. You just got to update the array, 549, 549. Then jump to label drop 7. Again, I change the name so I can drop down. This is just a copy and paste from above, and you change the appropriate values, right? So change to die 6-2, die 6-2. Make sure one of these changes appropriately. Change this to die 6-2 as being updated to a 6. Then you're adding all 3 variables, so this actually doesn't change at all. It's the same as above. This is the same as above. This is the same as up here. And then this is a copy and paste, right? And we're only doing it 3 times. Once again, could you simplify these 3 things? Yes, you could, by doing what I said before, pushing these 3 values to that temporary array, and then sorting it, splicing it. Wait a second, you don't have to splice it because there's only 3 values. So you sort it, and then you reduce it. The only thing you'd have to do, though, is, that's interesting. I'd have to think about that a little bit more, because you want to make sure that you're changing the lowest value to a 6. How could you do that just off the cuff? You could push these values to the array, you could sort it, then you could splice the lowest value, and then you could push a 6 into the array again, right? You could do that. Then you could reduce it, which gives you the total, and then you would have your value for the method array. So you could still do that, although this and this and this really isn't that much. So maybe I don't know. It would be up to you whether you thought it was valuable. Here's your label drop 7. You're adding to that stat loop amount, checking to see has it looped through as many times as it's supposed to. If yes, break the loop. If no, repeat above. Then you go on to your method 10. Okay, now this is the one where we're going to roll 3 die 6 3 different times and keep the best. So we have to introduce a couple new variables. So we have our stat loop amount set to 0. We're initializing our method 10 array, an empty array. Then we have our loop. And we're going to use these variables. We're going to have these 3 variables simulate the die 6 rolls. Then we're going to have a new variable, first roll. So variable 581, first roll, is equal to these 3 variables added up. Okay, so adding those 3 variables. And that gives you the value of your first roll. Then you can repeat these variables. So basically you can copy and paste this to the next section, and this doesn't change, this doesn't change, this doesn't change. This essentially gets updated so that instead of variable 581, you're using variable 582. But the math portion doesn't change. You're still adding 556, 557, and 558, so that doesn't change. And then you can copy and paste for this, right? You can copy and paste one of those again. And again, this doesn't change, this doesn't change, this doesn't change. We're just updating this to the third roll variable, right? And the math stays the same. So we do this 3 times. Then we have to check, and we have to say, okay, wait a second, which is higher? So if, conditional branch, if first roll variable is greater than or equal to second roll, and if first roll variable is greater than or equal to third roll variable, meaning actually the first roll is the higher, or at least equal to the highest, then we're going to use first roll as the stat for the array that we're going to push to our method what are we? Method 10, variable 550. And then jump to label dropped 8. This is just a copy and paste from above, and we're updating it. If the second roll is greater than or equal to the first roll, if the second roll is greater than or equal to the third roll, then we're going to use the second roll as the stat for the array, right? So we're setting this variable to this value of this variable. And then we push it. This is the same thing that's been using it throughout this event, right? We're pushing the value of 576 to the array 550, and then we're jump to label dropped 8. This is also a copy and paste, right? Where we're just updating the appropriate values. And then we have dropped 8, where we update our stat loop amount. We check, have I done it 8 times? If so, break the loop, drop down. If not, repeat above. Okay? And again, just remember the reason we are dropping, right? Because this actually confused me when I went back to look at it again. And I was like, why did I have that? Why do I have these drops down there? Because again, these values could be equal, in which case it might do this, and then without the dropped, it might skip this one, but it might run this one. Because roll 1 and roll 3 were the same number. And then that way it would end up doing it twice, and we don't want that to happen. So we use that dropped jump to label to go down to the next appropriate step. And that's method 10. So now we only have 2 more methods. So method 11 is very similar to method 10, only we're using 4 die 6, and we're only doing it twice. So we have our variable stat loop amount, set it to 0. We initialize our variable for our method array number 11. It's an empty array. We have our loop. We have our 4 variables simulating the die 6 rolls. Then we do all of our conditional checks like we did in previous methods. Again, this could be simplified by doing the pushing, the reducing, the splicing, and I missed one, sorting, splicing, reducing. And you're going to see those in just a minute coming up. So here's my 3 conditional branch checks, right? These work, it works. So if the die 6-1 is the lowest, then we're going to set, because remember we're doing this 2 times, so we have a first roll and a second roll. So we set our variable first roll, which is reused from up here. We're going to set that to the appropriate math, right? We're going to add the appropriate variables, and then jump to label dropped first roll. Again, name these anything you want that makes sense, just don't lose track. Don't repeat labels in the same event, because if you repeat a label in the same event, it's not going to know where to jump to, right? You can't have 2 labels with the same name. That would cause a problem. Unless, if you wanted to jump back to the same label at multiple parts of your event, then that's fine. You could certainly do that. You can have a label and you can jump to that in different places from your event. You just can't you can't have 2 labels with the same name. This is a copy and paste. Just update the necessary values. This is a copy and paste. Again, just update the necessary values. This is a copy and paste. Again, update the necessary values. Then it has to do all of that again, because that was just the first roll. So then we have drop to label first roll, and we repeat it. So basically, it's a copy and paste from above. This is all a copy and paste of the previous section. You just have to update it appropriately. This, and this, and this stay the same. This essentially stays the same. You're just changing, this was above first roll. It's being changed to second roll. But the math stays the same. This is now dropped to second roll. Drop second roll. This was the same as the previous section above, but you're again changing it to second roll. Same thing here. And same thing here. So you can save yourself a lot of time by copying and pasting from other, portions, just making sure you're updating the different values appropriately. Here's your label drop to second roll. And now that you've rolled your first roll and you've rolled your second roll, now you have to say, okay, which is the one I'm going to keep? So conditional branch. And this is where I'm using an else, right? You can tell because it's highlighted. You can also tell by clicking on it and the box is checked. So if first roll is greater than or equal to second roll, then we're going to use the value of the first roll for the stat for the array that we're going to push. Else, meaning that first roll is not greater than or equal to second roll, we're just going to use the second roll as the value for the variable that we're going to push to the array, right, to the method 11 array. So it's doing that simple check. Then it's going to add 1 to the loop amount. Then it's going to check, have I done it 8 times? If yes, break the loop. If no, repeat above. And it goes all the way back to the start of that loop, right? Way up here. Okay. That is method 11. So now we're at the end. We're at method 12. And then we're going to get to see that sorting and splicing and reducing. Okay? So here's method 12. We have to have a new variable, point pool, because this one, if the result is above an 18, we're rolling a die 20, right? If it's a 19 or 20, we have to reduce it and then add to the point pool. So now we have a variable point pool, and we're setting it to 0. We're resetting our stat loop amount to 0. We're initializing our method 12 array, right? It's an empty array. Then we have our loop, because we're going to do this. We're going to loop through a bunch of times. We have our new variable, die 20 roll, right? So our variable 38 die 20 roll is equal to random 1 to 20, simulating a die 20 roll. Then now we're at the section where this is the first time, I built the method 12. I'm going to make it tell me what it's doing, show me what it's doing. So first thing it does, show text, show me the die 20 roll, right? Show me what the results is. /v38, show me the value of that roll. Then it does a conditional branch check. If die 20 roll is equal to 20, right, what am I going to do? I am going to take that variable, 38, die 20 roll, and I'm going to subtract 2, right? So variable, subtract 2. And then I'm going to take that point pool variable, and I'm going to add 2 to it, because now I have 2 in my point pool because I reduced the roll by 2. So it does that check. Here's the next check. If die 20 roll is equal to 19, then do the same thing, but just reduce it by 1 and add 1. So basically this can be a copy and paste from here, and you just have to change this to a 19, this to a 1, this to a 1, and you're done. Okay? Then it's going to set the value of that die 20 roll to the variable that we're going to use to push to the array. And there we're doing it. Push the value of that variable, 576, to the array 552, the variable 552, which is our method 12 array. Then it tells us what it did. Show text. Current roll /v576, that's the modified die 20 roll, if it got modified up here. Array /v552, so it's going to tell me all the values in the array. And then the point pool total /v554, right? There's my point pool. So I'm making it tell me each time what it's doing so I can verify that it's actually working. Then I add my stat loop amount plus 1. This one requires us to do it 10 times, so it's checking. Have I done this 10 times? If it's equal to 10, break the loop. Otherwise, repeat above. And it goes back and loops through again. Now, this is the script for that sorting an array. So here it is. I'm just going to edit it. There it is. Okay. And I'll go back to the other screen to show it. Essentially, and again, you can change this to depend on how you sort it. I'm not very good at this. I looked this up, found it in JavaScript. I know that this is doing exactly what I want, meaning it's sorting it from lowest to highest, lowest to highest. And so the script is $game variables dot value and then the number of the variable. So this is my method 1 array, right? 541 dot sort. So sorting it means, right, I want to sort the values in the array. Then it's open parentheses, function, open parentheses, a comma b, closing parentheses. Then it's curly bracket, so opening curly bracket, return a minus b, and then closing curly bracket, and then closing parentheses. Now, could I have done all of this in one script? Yes, I could have. So when in theory, I could have put a semicolon here, and I could have had this going down 12 times, just changing this value, 541. I could have done that. But essentially, I was building this as you go, and so I didn't bother to do that. I just left them on their own individual command lines. It doesn't hurt anything. All of these are essentially the same, except you're changing the variable number. Variable 541, 542, 543, all the way down to 552. So this is sorting all of those arrays so that it will show it to the player. In this example, for my experiments, it will show it from lowest to highest because it makes it easier to see what your attributes were. Okay? Then, so there's the sort function that I mentioned previously that you could use to simplify some of the stuff. Now here's the splice function. So you have .splice. You have to have a variable to basically temporarily store what you spliced from the array. And in theory, you can use that variable if you want to. Now, I don't want to use this variable, so I don't really care. I'm reusing it immediately. So command line 577 stat for splice, and in the script, here's the script. Okay, and what is it actually doing? So $game variables dot value. Remember to pay attention to your capitals. Which variable am I talking about? 543. That's an array, right? That's an array, 543. It's this one. It's the third method, which is keep only 8 of the 10. So I got to get rid of 2 values from that array. So here's my 543 dot splice. That means I'm cutting something out of the array. I'm starting at position 0. So remember, an array, the positions start at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. So I'm cutting the first position out of that array. So the first value in that sorted array. Comma 1. You know what? I'd have to go back and look. I think this is how many things I'm cutting. So it's possible that you could combine these, maybe. I did not experiment with it. I just tested it and said, oh, look, this worked by cutting out one of the values. So I'm just going to repeat it again. I'm just going to copy and paste it. So this is cutting the first 2 values out of that sorted array, 543. And then this is cutting the first 2 values of the sorted 552 array, which is we rolled 10 20-sided dice and we're only keeping 8 of them. So again, this is the splice functionality. Okay? And you can use this as I explained previously. So you have your sort. This is how you sort an array. Here's your array, right? That value is your array. And here's how you splice from a particular array. This is the position that you're starting from. You can learn about splicing. You can read it in JavaScript. There's a bunch of stuff you can do with it. This is a very simple thing that you can do. Then it has a whole bunch of text to show you those things of, hey, these are the methods, right? So here's the first array, method 1 array, method 2 array. So it's showing you the results. Method 3, method 4, method 5, method 6, method 7, method 8, method 9, method 10, method 11, method 12. So it's showing you all the values in those arrays so you can look and see how it performed, basically what it did. Now this is that reduce function, meaning you're adding up all the values of that are in that array. So each one of these is essentially the same. You're just changing the variable number, right? So these are all so these are actually different variables. We haven't used these before. It's method array total 1, method array total 2, method array total 3. These are not arrays. These are just single variables. But they're adding the array. So when we're here, here's my variable. I'm setting it to the script, and I'm using this reduce function. What is the reduce function? It's this right here. So $, game, variables, dot value. Remember to watch your capitals. Which variable am I talking about? 541. This is my first method, my first array method. Dot reduce, right? This is a function, dot reduce. And then very similar to the sort, right? We have that open parentheses function, open parentheses a comma b, closing parentheses, open curly bracket, return a plus b, closing curly bracket, closing parentheses. Then I have a semicolon here because, actually, you know what? I don't need the semicolon because they're all, it doesn't hurt it. They're all single command lines. So you don't need the semicolon, but it's fine. It doesn't hurt anything. So that is that's the script that you use, the JavaScript. It's the reduce function. Basically, you're just adding up all the values that are in this array: 541, 542, 543, 544. So essentially, once you write this, you can copy and paste it and then just change the variable and then just change this value here to make sure you're doing the appropriate array. All the rest of it, all of this part stays the same. So you can save yourself some time. So this is reducing, adding up the values of all those arrays. Then it uses show text to show you that, right? So here's the total value of the array for method 1, method 2, method 3, method 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then it gives you the option, do you want to try again? So do you want to go through that whole thing again? Yes or no? Show choices. When yes, jump all the way back to the label again. Jump all the way to the start of this event. When no, it's going to show that book, right? I know it's not the greatest I know it's not the greatest graphic, but anyway, it's going to show the book. So you use show picture, right? So when you use the show picture command, you pick a picture number, right? And then you pick an image. So here's my image, open book, right? And then you got to figure out where you're putting it, right? Where's the origin start? What's your scale to make sure it fits where you want it to fit, and you can play around with the opacity, the blend mode, whatever. But basically you have to mess around with the scale to make sure your picture shows the way you want it to show. And the origin is either upper left or center, right? So again, you just have to mess around with this. I've done this in other tutorials. I've explained this before. And you can either do direct designation of the pixels 0, 0, or you can do it with variables, right? So I just did it with the pixels, the very corner of the screen, 0, 0. So show picture 1 is that open book. Then this, I've highlighted this before in previous tutorials. This is a plugin command. So this is actually a plugin. It's a default plugin that comes with MZ. You just have to activate it. It's the text picture plugin. And it allows you to convert text into a picture that you can display on the screen. So you have your command plugin, text picture, right? So here are my two plugins I have available. I don't have a lot of plugins. The command name, there's only one. This tells you a little bit of what it does, sets text to display as a picture. After this, execute show picture without specifying an image. So it tells you how to use this plugin. And then this text, you double click on it, this is the text that it's going to show. All right, so method one, and here's the array. So this is going to show you the values of the array. And then 561 is the total, that reduced total. And then 542, method 2, and then the reduced value of that array. And the nice thing about this, I've highlighted this in other tutorials, is that all the same things that you can do with show text, like clearly you can show variables and things, you can do that in this plugin. It doesn't give you a reminder. So if you don't remember what you can do, you'd have to go to, like, say, the show text command to see what you can do. But this goes much farther than show text, right? Show text only gives you 4 lines. This gives you a lot. You can basically keep adding to this until it eventually, goes beyond your screen, right? So you can put a lot of stuff here. Text to display as a picture, control characters are allowed, right? So you can do these variables. And then once you've done this, you have to do a show picture after it. So show picture number 2, and it's a blank image. And then I had to mess around with where I wanted those, that text to show up, right? Where did I want it to start? Where did I want it to appear on the screen? What did I want it to look like? And the scale and width. And basically, I just had to test this. Now, there's a new feature in MZ, which is really cool because it actually lets you preview what something's going to look like. I haven't tested it with this one, but it does let you preview where pictures are going to show on the screen without just doing a play test. So that's actually kind of cool. I'm not sure how that's going to work here, so I might check that. I'll check that out. But that's how you do the show text. That's where I'm putting the text on top of that book. So the way show picture works is the lower the number, it's going to appear first on the screen. So picture 1 appears, picture 2 appears on top of picture 1. Okay. Then here I'm just waiting 240 frames. 60 frames is a second, just so that you can see the comparison of the book. I could increase this to make it longer, or I could do a show text, which will make it stay on the screen until I were to click on the command to the text line. This I've highlighted before. It's a very useful script which allows you to clear all pictures at one time. So again, this is a script. It allows you to clear all the pictures. So rather than do, where is it? Page 2? Yeah. So here's your show picture. So rather than do erase picture and do that for each one, right? Because erase picture, you have to just pick one picture at a time. So instead of doing erase picture 1, erase picture 2, this script allows you to clear all pictures. So it's $game screen dot clear pictures open and closed parentheses. So remember to pay attention to your capitals. This is a very, very, very helpful script. I use it a lot. Then we'll go ahead and apply that. Then the text is saying, hey, do you want to see the average total points based on the multiple rolls? Show choices, yes or no. When yes, how many should I roll? And then there's a label choose again if you want to basically do this again. And then what this is doing, it's that functionality of I want to roll 10 times, I want to roll 100 times, I want to roll 1,000 times, never mind. When 10, This is just repeating method 12. That's all it's doing, repeating method 12. Previous events repeated method 1, method 2, method 3, method 4, whatever. So in this one, it's repeating method 12, and it's actually showing you the results, right? So this is just a copy and paste from above. Here's all the things we had to do. Oh, I'm sorry. I did introduce new variables. Variable total for average is set to 0. Total sets for average is set to 0. Method average is set to 0 because we want to see the actual average of the different times we use this. When it's 10, label repeat 10. So I can, go back to this. And then this part here is the repeat of method 12. Point pool is 0, stat loop amount is 0, resetting the array 12, method 12 to an empty array. Then the loop is essentially pretty much the same, except that we're going to add some maybe some showing stuff. But so we do our die 20 roll, then we do our check. Is it 20? If yes, reduce it by 2, add 2 to the point pool. If it's 19, reduce the roll by 1, add 1 to the point pool. Here's my stat that I'm going to push to the array. So my die 20 roll is the stat. Here's my script that I'm pushing to the array. That's the same as previously. Then I show text to tell you what it did. Here's your current roll. Here's the array. Here's your point pool. Add 1 to the loop. If it's, check to see if it's 10. If yes, break the loop. If no, repeat above. So that was similar to the method 12. Then what it's going to do is it's going to do that sort that array, because we're only dealing with method 12. So we're going to sort that array. We're going to splice the two values from it, just like we did before. Then we have these new variables. So we're going to reduce the array to get the method array total. I'm sorry, this isn't new. That was what it was before. But then we've got this total for average, right? So we want to keep a running total of the array totals, right? So each time we go through, we're going to add to it. So we take the variable method array total, so that's the value, the total value of that array. We're adding it to the variable total for average. And then we're also adding 1 to the total sets for average. So this will get me a running total of the total value of each set that we run, and this will give me the number of sets that we have run. So then we have show text to show you exactly what it's doing. Here are your attributes. Here's the total of your attributes. Here's the cumulative, 574, and here's the number of sets you've done, 575. Then it's going to do math. It's going to say, hey, what's the method average? So it's going to take the total cumulative amount, 574 variable, and divide it by the total number of sets, 575. So here's your math. $game variables.value, so the variable 574, divide that by the variable 575. And that will give you the method average. So then we use show text to show the method average. Then it does its check. Hey, have you done that 10 times? If total sets, right? If total sets for average is less than 10, then jump to repeat 10, right? Jump to label repeat 10, which is up here. Where is it? Right there, repeat 10. So jump back because we want to do it 10 times. And then if it's not, then it's going to ask you a question. Do you want to choose again for more averages? Yes or no? Show choices. When yes, jump to label choose again, and when no, just get goodbye and exit the event. Then it does the when you select 100. Now this is very, very similar. You just have to change a few different things. So you could copy and paste this. That's the same, that's the same, that's the same. So those are our variables. Total for average, total sets for average, method average. So those are all the same. They're being set to 0. The label has to change. You change it from repeat 10 to repeat 100. This is the same, this is the same, this is the same, right? We're resetting them to 0, and we're resetting the array. We're making an empty array. The loop is pretty much the same. So this is the same, this is the same, this is the same, meaning that in the when 10 section, this is the same, this is the same, this is the same, this is the same. So all that's the same. That's the same because you have to sort the array. You have to splice the array, so that's the same. This is the same, this is the same, this is the same. So that's all the same. This you have to update, so when it's less than 100, then jump to label repeat 100. Otherwise, do my math, right? So this is the same as it was in the when 10 section. This is, if it's not exactly the same, it's pretty close. So it's just showing you the cumulative total, the total number of sets, the method average, okay, because you did the math, right? So it's a little different. And then it says, do you want to do it again? Yes or no. When yes, jump to label choose again. When no, goodbye. Exit the event. When 1,000 is exactly the same. So you could, well, not exactly the same. There's only a couple things you change. So you can copy and paste one of these sections, like you can copy and paste the when 100 section, and then just change a few things. Not change, not change, not change. Yes, change it to repeat 1,000 instead of repeat 100. No change, no change, no change. None of this should be changed. Double check. No change, no change, no change, no change, no change, no change, no change. Yeah, none of that changes. No change, no change, no change. None of that changes. You have to change this to if it's under 1,000 instead of under 100. You have to change this to jump to label repeat 1,000 instead of repeat 100. This stays the same. This stays the same, and then all of this is the same. It's copy and paste it. Okay, and then when yes, go back to choose again. When no, goodbye. This is the when never mind, right? That was a choice that you could do. Do you want to see these run a bunch of sets? Never mind, it just goes to goodbye, it exits the event. And then when you choose no, meaning I don't want to do that, it jumps down here or basically it runs this and says goodbye, exit the event. And that's the end of the event. Now, I know that was super long. I know that was super, super long. I apologize. I hope you were able to stick with me. I'm not going to go back through this whole thing. The only thing I will re-highlight is that once you get down to these areas here, right? Once you get down to the sort function, and you know how to use this, and the splice function, and you know how to do that, and you know how to do the reduce function. Once you can do those three things, once you've seen that, then that means anywhere up here where I did it the hard way, essentially, right? Where anytime you see something like that a bunch of times, you in theory can replace those. You can replace this, this, and all of this. You can replace all of this with those other concepts, right? You can take these 4 variables, push them, right? We already know how to do push them to a temporary array. Then you can sort that array. And then if you need to, you can splice from that array. And then you can reduce that array to add up the remaining values. And then that value becomes your stat for array that you're going to push to the actual method array. So you're using a temporary array to do the work for you that would be done in all of this can be reduced to what? So you have one command line to create the new array. You need to push. So, if you can combine the pushes, great. Because technically you could combine, right? You could basically copy and paste this 4 times with a semicolon, right? So you put a semicolon after the line, and then you paste the line, and um, you just change actually you would have to do, oh no, I'm sorry. This would be the dice roll, the variable of the dice roll. So if you had this line 4 times, right? So let me just show you. If I did this, copy, and then we go here, paste, 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 and then I put semicolon here, semicolon here, semicolon here, and I'll just stick a semicolon there just because. You don't have to, but you do that. And then these would be your dice rolls. I would change these to the dice roll. So this would be 556, 557, 558, and 559, right? And so these would be changed to those variables, and then this would be changed to your temporary array. So you could have that all as one script, okay, to do all the pushing of these to the temporary array. And then, of course, you have your sort, your splice, and your reducing stuff. Once you've seen that, you can significantly shorten many of these different methods. All right. Anyway, wow, that was long. I hope you were able to stick with it, or maybe you're only interested in certain portions of this. So, a lot of people scan through these. They jump. They don't watch them start to finish. They just jump to different parts that interest them. That's cool. Whatever helps you, whatever works best for you. So, I really hope this was helpful. I hope that somebody gets something out of this that they can use, even if it's just, hey, I never saw that reduce function before. I never saw that sort function before. I never saw that splice function before. If that's all you get from this, and it helps you when you're dealing with arrays in other things that you're building, that's cool. You still got something out of it, so that's awesome. Again, hope this helps. Sorry for how long this is. I'm still working on catching up on more stuff I've either finished or I'm still working on. I'm going to get to it, I promise. Anyway, I hope this is helpful to folks. If you do find these videos helpful, if you just appreciate the time that goes into these, please consider liking, subscribing, getting notifications, leaving comments. My whole purpose in this is just giving back to try to help other people. And, so anyway, and I try to respond to all comments. So anyway, hopefully, folks, I hope you're having a great day. I'm hoping you're having an awesome time. I hope hoping you're having fun working with RPG Maker. I know I am. I'm having a blast. And so, until I can get another video up, which hopefully will be tomorrow or whatever, I'm going to keep working on them. I hope you guys are having an awesome time. Happy gaming, happy game developing. I hope I didn't make any mistakes in this because it's really long. And I will talk to everybody later. Bye.